right, welcome to Reptile Fight Club. Tonight we've got another wonderful guest lined up, and we're excited to talk to him. So this is another segment of Grilling the Expert, and we're very pleased to have Bob Zappalorti with us tonight to talk about some of his amazing history in herpetology and some great stories, I'm sure. So we're very, very pleased to have him on. Thanks for coming on, Bob, and excited to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here and meet both Rob and Justin.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, what a pioneer and just you've got an amazing career in herpetology. And yeah, we're just beyond excited to talk with you tonight. So,
well, I've been a professional herpetologist since 1964 when I started at the Staten Island Zoo. I was hired by the late Carl Caulfield, and he was my mentor and my friend.
Not much better mentor than that. Yep. And especially if you can call him a friend. Yeah, I think his books have meant a lot to Rob and myself, and we've been very excited that have that link with somebody that knew Carl Caulfield. What an amazing thing. So, well, I guess what are some of your fondest memories or things that you were involved with Dr. Caulfield?
Well, I got the opportunity to go out in the field with him on several occasions, hunting for pine snakes and corn snakes and timber rattlesnakes in the pine barrens.
Yeah.
And in the early years, 1964, 65, 67, 68, going to Okatee, South Carolina, in Jasper County, and hunting for diamondbacks and all the different snake species that are found there.
Yeah.
Being in the field with Caulfield was a real education because he knew so much about both the natural history and the plants and the birds and all the wildlife that occurred in the area. So he loved to tell stories and to teach his friends and co-workers.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very exciting.
Oh, nice. Yeah. He's been an inspiration for a few of our herp trips. Maybe Rob can expound on that a little more, I'm sure. But yeah, we went to some places kind of walking in his footsteps and looking for some of the same spots that he went to and describes in his book. And so it's really neat to kind of, compare notes, I guess. I'm sure things were a little different when he was walking those areas and, your early career, but I'm sure things have changed a bit. So I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Okatee got closed because it became so popular that, actually there would be 100 people down there snake hunting. Mm-hmm. And then that number grew. So a lot of the landowners became angry because people were slobs and they would, leave their trash and do things that the landowners didn't like. And then they finally just closed it off to all the snake hunters. So, so many animals were over collected, especially the Okatee corns that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, very popular, right, in herpetoculture. It's unfortunate when, I think that probably happens a lot more than we'd like it to, where people are using science to kind of make a buck. And that's really a frustrating thing. I would encourage people to not do that, and we benefit from this science, to learn about I'm a big fan of natural history and just learning about what the animals are doing in the wild, and, to take them out of that wild environment and just keep them in a box. I mean, it's nice
I'll give
to
you a good example of
Sure.
that, because you just triggered something in my memory.
Mm-hmm.
The average home range of a corn snake is between 80 and 100 acres.
Wow.
The average home range of a pine snake, a northern pine snake, is 150 to 300 acres.
Right.
So people take them and they keep them in this little cage,
Yeah.
And when the animals in the wild, they have the freedom to roam around and forage and do whatever they need to do to reproduce. and then people keep them in these small cages and in plastic boxes and sawdust, and it's just it's unfair to the snake.
Yeah.
It's always nice when people have larger cages with natural settings. It just makes the snake a little more at home rather than living in a plastic box.
Right. Yeah, I think we're moving. In general, I think herpetoculture is moving away from the small plastic racks, the boxes and the racks and things, and moving more towards naturalistic vivaria. It seems like there's kind of a movement in that direction, but it's difficult to erase the last 15, 20 years and change, from keeping in little tiny shoe boxes to large naturalistic enclosures. I know I was kind of sold on that idea, early in my keeping career, and unfortunately, some of that still persists, but trying to change and make it better for the animals. I think that's always a good thing. As long as you're trying to make it better for the animals, that's the key. Yeah.
And it's a lot more enjoyable as a keeper, right? To be able to see the animals engaging in more naturalistic behaviors, right?
Yeah. For sure. Yep.
I think that's frustrating too for folks, that have seen them in the field and kind of observed them in their natural habitat and kind of seen, what they can do in their environment. I had a recent experience with a Kimberly rock monitor where just watching it crawling on the rocks, and I thought I just can't bring myself to put it in a cage, unless it's a really huge, really big naturalistic setup. I think I'd feel a little bad about that.
Yeah, a lot of the zoos have come around to making really beautiful exhibits, natural looking exhibits. So we've come a long way.
Yeah.
And some of those products actually, so there are people that are kind of doing it themselves, right? These great artistic talents who are putting what essentially look like zoo backgrounds into enclosures, and there are actually companies that are manufacturing those products now as well. So I know that
I've seen some ads in Reptile magazine, nice enclosures people can buy now that weren't available years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have a bit of an outline here, no worries, and we can kind of work through it to hopefully, gain access to all these great stories and insights that you have. So we kind of brushed over it a bit. How did you come to be at the Staten Island Zoo?
Well, as a young boy, reptiles and amphibians was my hobby. It started probably, I don't know, when I was 9 or 10 years old. And I grew up in Staten Island, New York. And then my father bought his book, Snakes and Snake Hunting, Caulfield's book. And after reading the book, my friends and I, who were also interested in reptiles and amphibians, Jim Bukowski and John Erickson, we would go to the zoo on Sunday, because every Sunday they'd have a public feeding of the reptiles and the alligators. So it was a big attraction. So we would go to the zoo and watch the snakes being fed. And one time there was a big crowd in front of the king cobra cage. So we went down and we were watching, and the door opened, and a man with a suit and a bow tie held a yellow rat snake on a pair of tongs up for the king cobra. And the king cobra rose up and struck forward, and it missed the snake and almost got Caulfield's hand, and the whole crowd jumped back. Everybody was screaming,
Yeah.
So then he did it again, and this time the cobra was able to grab the rat snake and swallowed it, and he closed the door. And I later learned that was Caulfield. That was the first time I ever saw him. So a couple of years later, when I was older, after I graduated from high school, I was working as a doorman in Manhattan, 4 to 12 shift, opening doors for people and hailing cabs. And, wasn't a very fun job, but I was doing it. And I was married at the time. I had a couple of kids.
Yeah.
So I went to the zoo on speculation, and I just asked to see Caulfield, and he allowed me to come into his office, and I asked him about the possibility of employment, and he just told me, he says, I have a whole drawer full of applications here. He says, but if you want, you can fill out a application and I'll keep it on file.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to him for a while and told him how much I was interested in herpetology, and I read his book and all the other books that were available at the time. There wasn't very, very many. And that was it. I went home, and a couple of months later, I got a call, and it was Caulfield. He says, "You're still interested in the job?" And I said, "You bet I am." And he told me to come down on Monday morning and he'd start my training.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah.
that was in 1964.
Wow.
So I worked at the zoo for 14 years.
Mm-hmm. What was your main involvement at the zoo, or what areas did you kind of specialize in?
I was a reptile keeper.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with the rattlesnake collection that he had and all the other critters.
Yeah.
So
nice.
It was really a good experience and started my learning career.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fantastic, right? I mean, and it's easy, I think, in some ways for us to sort of idealize that. So I'm sure there was a lot of good and bad, but yeah, I'm sure it's great memories. Hey. And then you started doing work with bog turtles, right? And that led you into your consulting business.
Yes. While at the zoo, I wanted to do some research, and Caulfield encouraged us to do research. And I wanted to pick an animal that there wasn't that much known about. So I researched it and found out that, we had bog turtles right across the river in New Jersey. I was living on Staten Island at the time. Mm-hmm. And I contacted a few people from the New York Herp Society that lived in that area. And I found a location where there was a known population. So I went there and got permission from the landowner to start my studies there. And that's how I started researching bog turtles. Then after a few years, I got contacted by Dr. Richard Bruce from University of Western North Carolina. And he asked me to come down to Highlands Biological Station to reconfirm historic records that Ken Newmorris had found several years earlier. Mm-hmm. So I got a grant from the University of Western North Carolina, and I went down there. And for 3 years, I would go down in the spring, and I would make 2 trips a season, early spring and late spring. Mm-hmm. And, we discovered, I think, 5 new populations and reconfirmed all of Ken Newmorris's historic sites. So that was a great experience. Plus, I was in an area that's historic for salamanders, and Dr. Bruce is a salamander specialist. And it was a great experience. And then eventually Dennis Herman from the Atlanta Zoo took over the project I started, and he carried that project on for another 20 years.
How are the populations of bog turtles doing these days?
It depends on what state you're in. Some states, they have really declined. Other states, the core populations are doing quite well.
Okay.
But bog turtles face a lot of predation. There's more predators around because people don't trap anymore for the fur industry. And you have just so many predators that eat bog turtles. They only lay an average of 3 eggs a year. They don't double clutch like some other turtles do. And if a predator finds the eggs, then, it doesn't take long to eat 3 eggs.
Yeah.
Skunks, raccoons, weasel, shrews, and even snakes will eat the eggs.
Yeah. They got a big lineup of predators, huh?
Yeah.
Cow. But they persist in some areas pretty well then, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
So I continued working with the bog turtles. We had a contract with the state of New Jersey, the Endangered Non-Game Species Program. When I left the zoo, that was the first contract I got from my consulting company. I started Herpetological Associates in 1977, and I got a contract with the Endangered Non-Game Species Program from New Jersey to study bog turtles, timber rattlesnakes, corn snakes, and pine snakes. So that started my career as a consultant.
Yeah.
And even while I was at the zoo, I would get calls from engineering companies and to look for bog turtles along the right-of-ways of potential roads or housing developments. So I started to see that there might be a niche where I could actually earn a living by, studying reptiles and amphibians and getting paid for it.
Nice.
And the first year I had one contract. It was tough when you had 4 kids to support. Yeah. So I worked part-time as a musician on weekends in a band. I played bass guitar.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad was a bassist or is a bassist, I guess. He doesn't play much anymore, but he put himself through college doing in a cover band with my mom. So
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Kind of fun. Cool. What kind of music did you play?
At the time, it was top 40 music, cover stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, we wrote a lot of our own stuff too.
Cool. Yeah. Good stuff.
Very cool.
Well, yeah.
Well, another thing I wanted to mention, just because it's someone who I think we've all seen a lot of his work, but I haven't heard that much about him. Zig Lashinsky, right, who I believe you worked with at Staten Island Zoo, a super famous photographer. So many of the classic images that come to my mind were taken by him. So I'm just super curious, anything you remember.
Ziggy and I remained in contact, right up until Ziggy passed away 2 years ago. He lived 5 houses down from where I live now in Toms River, New Jersey. And Ziggy did some field work with me. He would go out on jobs and, do amphibian surveys and snake surveys. And I learned a lot about photography from both Ziggy Lazinski and Manuel Rubio. I'm sure you heard of Manny Rubio. He's also a Staten Islander. And Zig was just amazing. He knew how to build sets so it looked like you're taking a picture out in the woods, but it was, on our table, with nice lighting and stuff. So, Ziggy was an amazing guy. He was also very good at imitating frogs. He could do each species of frogs that are found in the Northeast. He could, even in the Southeast, he could mimic those calls. He was very talented in doing that. In fact, one night down in Okatee, we were trying to photograph barking tree frogs. Ziggy and I were with our hip boots, and we had our flashes. But the frog, we spotted a frog, but he wasn't calling, so we shut off our lights, and Ziggy started imitating the barking tree frog. While he was doing that, we saw some lights coming towards us. They kept coming closer and closer.
Yeah.
And don't you think it was Dick Bartlett came to photograph the barking tree frog? We all got a big laugh out of that.
Tricking herpetology.
You're pretty good. He says, you fooled me.
That's funny.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I was just looking through the John Baylor in the original Audubon field guide for reptiles and amphibians, right? The green book. I was looking through, the photos in there. I think that was the first reptile book I ever had. And so all those photos I kind of have ingrained in my memory. And I know you have 6 or 7 photos in that book, and Zig had 60 or one of the most or second most of anybody of all those photos.
Well, Zig, after he left the zoo, he made a living selling photographs. He and his wife, Millie, would go around on field trips and just take as many, slides as they could. And he worked for an agency called Animals in New York City. So Animals would, promote his photographs. So for years, Ziggy was able to make a living doing that until the digital cameras came out, and then everybody became a photographer. And, it's pretty tough to sell pictures anymore.
Yeah.
I know, right? That's the other part of that that's so amazing, right? Is given the constraints of film and it's so easy now to take innumerable pictures. The quality he was getting, without being able to cheat like we can now is amazing.
When I was taking pictures, I mean, there was so many things. You had to have flash, and the lighting had to be just so. And you're taking slides, so it would cost you a lot of money. There would be 36 pictures on a roll of slide film. And then you'd have to send them to Kodak to be developed. So you had to pay for the film, and then you had to pay for the developing. And if you had a bad picture, you just had to throw them away. Well, for 40 years, I took 35 millimeter color slides, and I had over 30,000 slides in my slide collection, probably even more than that.
Yeah.
And I recently just donated them to the Museum of Natural History because I don't use them anymore. And I figured a lot of them had locality data, so the American Museum of Natural History accepted them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always the question, because I've just got a library of photos, that I've taken, and I just kind of squirrel them away. And, it's hard to go through everything and organize and, put it out there in a usable form sometimes. So yeah, that's good use of those slides, I'm sure, to benefit the museum.
Yeah, well, it was Ziggy that encouraged me and Manny Rubio to do things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
Plus, I enjoy documenting what I'm seeing and what I find.
Right.
Sometimes you'll find a snake eating something, or some people are lucky enough to get like timber rattlesnakes in combat.
Yeah.
I still haven't come across that, but my good friend and colleague has photographed it. As many other people have, but just one of those things.
It's always great to see those natural history events. I was driving through Western Australia, and we saw a snake in the road, and it looked kind of strange. And so I got out, and it was a big mulga trying to eat a death adder that had been hit by a car and was kind of plastered on the road. And he was trying to peel it off the road to eat it. And so I got out, and I was taking pictures, and I spooked him a bit, and he took off. So I got the death adder off the road with my snake hook, and I walked over and gave it to him, and he ate it on the side of the road.
Oh, cool.
And I actually just got that observation published in Herpetological Review. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, it should be in the next issue, I guess. So
I'll look for it.
Got word of that a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
But I included a picture of the snake eating the death adder. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned Manny Rubio. Certainly his book, Rattlesnakes to the United States and Canada. So in the last, we really like going to Australia, but obviously with COVID and things, that was foreclosed. And we were kind of looking for, okay, what can our herping task be? And I was actually inspired by Manny Rubio's book to say, hey, let's just go find all the things that are in this book, and kind of in the context of forms herping. So it's all those things, plus recognizing the eastern blacktail and what's the other one that
canebrake.
And the canebrake, Atricot. But otherwise, it's entirely just the book, in terms of saying, let's make this the task.
Were you able to accomplish it?
So I'm at 24 of 27 of the Crotalus right now. I'll give a shot for the other 3 this year. I need to start working through the Cistrurus. I only have one of the Cistrurus at this point.
I'm behind him a little bit at, I think, 20 or so, or 21. Few behind Rob.
But yeah, it's just so inspiring, right? And the kind of the goal became, hey, in the same way of being inspired by Mr. Caulfield's books of saying maybe the real answer is, hey, this is the vision or the journey, and then that becomes all the venomous reptiles of the United States. But it's as the journey, inspired by the stories, and kind of to me, that's really the stuff that's compelling. So I don't know, it's kind of combining both of those influences, or just the influences of their work. So I'm super appreciative.
I'm curious of your what's your favorite rattlesnake, or which, do you have any fun stories about rattlesnakes?
I think my favorite rattlesnake is the timber rattlesnake because I'm so familiar with it, and I've been able to study it for years and years. And working with Howard Reinert from Trenton State College, we've collaborated on research since the early 1990s.
Yeah,
and we've radio tracked over 50 individuals. And the Pine Barrens rattlesnakes are quite different than what we call the mountain or the mountain rattlesnake, timber rattlesnake. I mean, they behave very similar, but the habitat is totally different. In fact, are you familiar that the timber rattlesnake in the Pine Barrens hibernates in water along the streams?
Yeah, that was such a weird thing to find out. I didn't discover it, of course, but to hear that was just kind of an odd thing.
But when you think about it, a lot of the dens in the mountains have underground springs, so there could be water in some of those dens, which helps them to maintain moisture. In fact, when they come out in the spring, some of them are covered in mud when they come out of the rocky fissures. So they may also do the same thing underground, but unfortunately, we can't go down and look and see where they're actually.
Right.
I guess they'll have cameras someday that can go down there.
Yeah. Have a little robot crawl down there and film it.
Well, that's what they do with the gopher tortoises. They put cameras on the tortoise's back, and the tortoise go down and burrow, and they can see all the other critters that are down there in the burrow.
I was reading Bruce Means' Stalking the Plumed Serpent, and he talks about shoving a pipe down there and putting it up to your ear and listening, for a rattle or a tortoise, the exhale of the tortoise, and you can tell what you're bumping into with the pipe.
I know Bruce Means. We recently were together at a conference in Florida with the Gopher Tortoise Council conference last fall. We exchanged books. Yeah,
he's a great author. I watched that show he did, The Last Tapui, and
the National Geographic.
Yeah,
that was wonderful.
It was great. Yeah, yeah, fun stuff. Yeah.
When did you start doing research with Joanna Berger from Rutgers?
That was 40 years ago. So it was probably about 1981, 82, somewhere around there. I met Joanna. She was on the advisory council for the Endangered Non-Game Species Program, and I was under contract with the state at the time, so I used to go to those meetings. And she's originally pretty much an ornithologist. She wrote hundreds of papers on birds and ecology from all over the world. But I was telling her about the pine snakes and how they dig their own nest, and she didn't believe me. Snakes can't make their own nest. I said, well, you got to come out with me in the spring and I'll show you. And sure enough, she did. And that started it. She just became fascinated with pine snakes. And I think at this point she likes them more than birds, but she may not admit that, but I think she does.
Very cool.
That's awesome. You guys certainly have put out a ton of great super interesting publications, and I actually have a whole sequence of questions on Pine Barrens herping and things that are informed by a lot of that research. So it's definitely a tremendous amount that you all have learned. I'm sure there's still a lot to go, but tremendous sample sizes and things like that.
Oh yeah, we've been studying a couple of populations for the last 35 years now. Down in Burlington County and up in Ocean County. There's certain dens that we excavate every year. They were originally natural dens, but when we dug them up in the wintertime, we mapped the tunnels, like the entrances, and we reconstructed the entrances using cement blocks butted up against one another, so they formed a tunnel.
Yeah.
And then we built a chamber down below, a meter down, 3 feet down, with some cement blocks, and then put a roof over it. And then each spring around mid-March, before they come out of hibernation, we excavate the top from the top down. We never disturb the entrance because that has all the scent trails,
Yeah.
For the snakes. So we only just dig straight down from the top and we lift the roof off.
Okay.
And the pine snakes dig their burrows. They go through the holes in the cement blocks and go into the bee horizon sand where they hibernate. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 of them together. Sometimes there's one alone. So every year we reconstruct the den, and then we can go there and find the snakes. And we've had some snakes. We inject pit tags in them. Those are little microchips that they're passive, so you need a reader to read the chip. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So we've had hatchlings that we put in the dens, and we've been able to document survivorship and growth and longevity.
Oh, cool.
And what we learned was a female pine snake, the average lifespan in the wild is 16 years.
Huh.
And the average lifespan of an adult male is 25 years.
Wow.
And the reason is that the pine snakes, the female pines, are so vulnerable when they're nesting. They nest out in the open sunny areas where they dig their burrows. And while they're digging, red-tailed hawks, fox, coyote, and poachers can find them very easily.
Yeah.
So that's why there's a big difference between the survivorship of males versus females.
Sure. Is the population kind of imbalanced because of that? Do you see a lot more males than you do females?
We're starting to notice that trend because not only are they being predated, we also have a new predator that's very common in the Pine Barrens now. It's the coyote, the eastern coyote.
Oh, okay.
And the red fox and gray fox and skunk, they all dig up the eggs and eat them. Or again, we have a problem with poaching. So between the predators and the poachers, the pine snake population is starting to crash in the Pine Barrens.
Is there any kind of Head Start program that's been?
Well, Joanna and I have been doing that at our studying areas for years.
Okay.
We'll take the eggs back to the lab, incubate them, hatch them out, and then put pit tags on all the babies, and then put them back at the nesting areas. Yeah. We actually take the eggs back and we bury them in the ground where they would normally be anyway, because we think the shed skins from the hatchlings and the eggshells what helps guides the snakes back to the nesting area. They have a fidelity to the nesting area.
Oh, interesting.
So they, the females return. The mother and then daughters and sisters all come back to the same nesting area where they reproduce. But the problem with that is once predators learn where those nesting areas are, they get eaten. So by taking the eggs and hatching them in the lab, we're protecting, those cohorts.
Yeah.
But some years there's not a lot of the same snakes coming back. They may skip a year if they don't get enough food, or they could have been killed during the rest of the season by a mammal predator, or run over on a road, and then that little population would die out.
Sure. You mentioned the scent trails at the dens as well. Is that important for site fidelity as well? If those are messed up, do they seek another place of refuge, or?
Yeah, I mean, especially if they have the scent of a predator around, they may avoid that den and go somewhere else. We've learned that pine snakes don't always hibernate at the same area, especially males. Males tend to bounce around. They shift dens from one season to the next.
Yeah.
But females tend to have a better fidelity to a den, to a nesting area.
Yeah, that makes sense.
With all snakes, chemical cues, the scent trails, are very important. As you know, that the snake's forked tongue is how they find their way around in the world. A snake's sense of smell is probably equal to, if not better than a canine, than a dog or a fox. They have a tremendous ability to scent trail, and that's how they follow their way around and get to learn things and find their food and where their hibernacula are and where their nesting areas are. It's all imprinted in their brain. They learn over time.
Yeah. Do we know how long the scent trails can last?
It's hard to determine how long they last,
Mm-hmm.
but if a snake is returning to the same area year after year,
Yeah.
and through radio tracking, we've learned that they have a pattern that when they branch out from their hibernacula, as the snake gets older, sometimes they move further and further away from the den and learn new areas to find food, and then come back and hibernate in the same area or one of the other areas that they've learned about.
Mm-hmm.
They're communal. They share dens, and when the males are searching for the females in the spring, they learn where the females hang out, and they'll go back to those same areas where the females are. Mm-hmm. So it's quite interesting what these animals do, and it seems like we never stop learning new little things.
Right.
The more you learn, then the more questions get raised.
Yeah. The more you find out you don't know much, Yep. How fascinating. I just love the idea of radio tracking a species and learning about what they do in the wild. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, radio tracking has really taught a lot of herpetologists and scientists about snake ecology. Because prior to that, it was just chance encounters, or you were trying to trap them. But it's only a snapshot into what their life history really is.
Yeah, kind of limited information you can gather from those recaptures. Yeah.
As part of your nesting research, have you ever found infertile eggs in the wild? I know there's been a lot of discussion in sort of the captive community as to whether are slugs a product of captivity or are they a natural phenomenon?
No, there's times when there's what we call infertile or just plugs. Mm-hmm. It happens. I believe it's because that maybe the snake didn't mate that season, because they can retain fertile sperm in their oviduct. So she may lay the normal or average clutch of an adult pine snake is 9 eggs, but it ranges from 4 eggs up to the most we ever found from one female is 14 eggs, and their eggs are big. I mean, they're the size of chicken eggs. Yeah, maybe just a little more elongate, but they're very large, leathery shells. So.
Yeah, absolutely. One herping story I was hoping to get to that's mentioned in Gary Williamson's book on his letters with Carl Caulfield was your Alligator River incident in 1971. And I know, so kind of a road cruising story, right? And maybe instructive for all of us who go road cruising.
Yeah, well, I was with Ray Mendez, who formerly worked at the American Museum of Natural History and then went off on his own as a consultant and has done some wonderful things throughout his career. He worked for Hollywood movies. He worked on Silence of the Lambs, doing special effects, and the original. He did the original poster for the horror movies and things like that. And he does a lot of panoramas and dioramas for zoos and exhibits. So Ray Mendez was driving his car. My colleague Ed Johnson was in the back, and we started road cruising. This is down in North Carolina, Hyde County, and some of those around Lake Manamaskeet area. And I thought, what if I sat up on the front bumper and held onto the roof rack, and I'd be able to see the road better? So I had my right hand on the roof rack, and I had my flashlight in my left hand, and I would scan the shoulder so we could see what, a wide range of what might be on the road. So we were doing quite well, finding corn snakes, a couple of canebrakes, and lots of amphibians. It was really a great night. And the problem was there was a lot of mosquitoes out too, and they kept getting in my eyes, and I was trying to swat the mosquito. Well, one time I took my hand off the roof rack to slap a mosquito, and at the same instant, Ray and Ed saw a big snake on the road, and they jammed the brakes on.
Oh no.
So obviously, gravity pushed me right off the front bumper, and I landed on my head,
Oh no.
and actually fractured my skull.
Huh.
But I was laying there, and the guys thought I was fooling around. They said, "Come on, Bob, get up. Let's see this snake." And they rolled me over, and there was blood coming out of my ear.
Ah.
So they put me in the car, and we were like miles from any civilization. They found a payphone, and they called an ambulance, and the ambulance came and took me to the hospital. But
Oh man.
that's how I got a fractured skull.
Oh, go. I had a similar experience out backpacking with my cousin. I was riding on the hood of the car because I was getting car sick, and he was driving slow at first, but kept getting faster and faster. And then there was a big rock in the middle of the road that he slammed on the brakes. And so I went flying and skidding along the road, and the car was coming faster and skidding and ran over my foot. And flipped my shoe across the desert, and so and it broke a bone or two in my foot, and so I and then we hiked for about a mile trying to find this canyon entrance, and that was not a very great experience.
Yeah, well, when I was in the hospital, my brain started to swell.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
And the doctors thought they were going to have to operate, cut my skull open. So. Luckily, the day they came to do the operation, I started to get feeling in my because my eye wasn't blinking or anything.
Mm-hmm.
The whole side of my face was just like numb. It was just sitting there. If I smiled, only one part of my lip would go up, and the other part would just stay solid.
Yeah. Oh
so,
man.
Of course, I had a swollen brain, but luckily it cleared up on its own. The swelling went down, and I didn't have to get my operation.
That's good. Yeah. Man. Yeah, those head injuries are no joke. Yeah. Scary.
Oh my goodness. So in Snakes and Snake Hunting that we mentioned a couple times, Carl, famous in the Crossley Pines and Corns section, describes the Pine Barrens as being full of snakes, but it doesn't yield its snakes easily. And I know you've kind of repeated that line as just so accurate. And certainly that's been my very short-lived experience of it out there. So I did kind of want to talk through what good choices and bad choices in terms of Pine Barrens herping and kind of lessons learned or lessons you're willing to impart. The one thing that I've noticed really strongly throughout your work has been talking about sort of the complexities of systems. Rather than looking for animals, it's looking for the right conditions based on soil type, topography, the sort of the flora assemblages, those sorts of things. Would you say that's accurate?
It's accurate, and it helps you to better understand where you might want to look for snakes. But knowing the snake's ecology is important too. You have to dovetail those two things together. Mm-hmm. And through radio tracking, we were able to learn, because pine snakes and hognose and black racers, they're all diurnal species. But king snakes and corn snakes and coastal plain milk snakes tend to become very nocturnal during the warmer months, June, July, August, early September. Mm-hmm. So they're more secretive snakes, harder to find. If you're driving around, you have a good chance of finding one of the diurnal species crossing a sand road or a paved road. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they often get killed when they do that.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of our radio track snakes crossing roads. But getting back to where to look for them, by radio tracking, we learned that corn snakes are very secretive. That's why you don't see them that often. But what we also learned was the corn snake will sometimes be a community nester. Mm-hmm. Females will go to a nice, what we call a paleo dune. It's a natural sand ridge where there's less vegetation and they're much more open. Even gravid timber rattlesnakes will use those as gestation sites. So a lot of the egg-laying snakes go there, pines, corns, hognose, kings. to lay their eggs in these paleo dunes. So we found one area where it was a community corn snake nesting site, and we counted 64 destroyed corn snake eggs at this one site, and one clutch of coastal plain milk snakes were there too.
Yeah.
So what we did is, in order to protect the eggs, we took large plastic boxes. We drilled holes in them. We put PVC pipe, and the PVC pipe would connect to the mole tunnels, because that's where the corn snakes crawl down into the mole tunnels, and they make chambers, and they lay their eggs there.
Interesting.
So we connected the PVC pipe into the box that we had, and we put the sand in there so that when the snake crawled through the PVC pipe, it would come out into a nice sandy area. And sure enough, they worked. But they only worked because there was a couple of large old adult females that was their traditional nesting site. So the first 2 years, we had a lot of snakes nesting in our boxes. I mean, this was at 2 separate locations.
Yeah.
But what happened was those old females got killed by predators. So then there was no more scent trails for the young snakes, the young females, to follow. So those nesting sites became abandoned. So it's hard to find corn snake nesting sites. We only found 2 where more than 2 females nested. One had, we found 5 clutches of eggs there, and another one had 4 clutches of eggs.
Like hatched out, old eggshells kind of thing.
No, right? When we put our boxes, that's what we found.
Oh, gotcha. Laid eggs, yeah.
So before that, the destroyed eggs, we were able to just count all the eggshells on the surface.
Yeah.
Where the animals had eaten the contents and just left the shells scattered around.
Gotcha. I read about some sites that had, numerous eggshells from previous seasons and things like that, where they'd kind of accumulate because the site was good enough that it was, protected. And
well, that's what you see with the pine snake nest.
Okay.
When you excavate a burrow, you'll find shells from the previous year. They usually last at least 2 years in the ground before the insects or they just fall apart.
Gotcha. Okay.
There was one nest we found out by the Crosley area several years ago. We saw a nice big dump pile. The dump pile is what the snakes pull out to make the burrow. So Joanna and I excavated that burrow, and first we found 1 clutch of pine snake eggs, and there was a second clutch of pine snake eggs, and then a third clutch of pine snake eggs.
Wow.
And at the back of the tunnel, there was a gravid female that didn't lay yet. So, there was a community nesting site. And unfortunately, the following year, and for the following several years, no snakes came back to that area to nest. Now, we don't know whether those females were killed by predators, were they collected, or because we disturbed the area, they didn't come back. But we never could figure out why no other female came back to nest that one particular spot.
Yeah, that's a head scratcher for sure. And I guess you weren't able to radio track the one that was there, that was present, the gravid female.
We could have radio tracked it, but at the time we figured, they'll come back next year.
Oh yeah.
So that's why you'll if you capture a female in the spring, especially in a new area where you haven't been studying them, you want to radio track it to see A, where it's going to nest, and B, where it's going to hibernate. So radio tracking allows you to discover those things.
Yeah. I imagine the excavation of that burrow system to find the eggs and the gravid female, that must have been a pretty delicate excavation to not damage the eggs.
They're not that deep.
Okay.
The eggs are usually 8 to 10 inches below the surface.
Okay. Interesting.
And they only dig in areas where there's some kind of structure. There's certain plants that grow in the open sunny areas Pennsylvania sedge, pine barren sandwort, Hudsonia, golden heather. Those are plants that like open, sunny areas and not shaded. So they never nest in the forest where it's shaded or not enough heat to incubate the eggs.
Gotcha.
It takes approximately 8 weeks, 8 to 8.5 weeks in the wild for the eggs to hatch.
And what's the, I guess, what are the eggs surrounded, or do they have kind of a pocket, air around them, or is it kind of...
After the female digs her tunnel, then she makes a wider chamber where she can coil around, just a little bit bigger than her body when it's coiled.
Yeah.
Then she lays the eggs there. And sometimes she'll move as she lays each egg. So sometimes the eggs will be in a line. Other times they're clustered together. And once they dry, they adhere together in a solid mass.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and then the babies there's a little, like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch airspace above them. So when they're hatching, they have a little area so they can clear their lungs and start breathing the air.
Yeah. Do they backfill or is the chamber open to the...
doesn't backfill. She just once she's done and she's rested, then she just leaves the nesting area, goes off into the forest, in her home range to build up the body weight that she lost from laying all those large eggs. They lose almost 50% of their body weight when they nest.
Sure. Yeah. It's amazing how much resources those females put into the offspring. And yeah. What a tragedy when a predator finds them. That's rough. But very interesting. Do you know how long the babies stay after they hatch? Stay at the nest.
They stay around the nesting burrow until they shed.
Okay. And
sometimes they shed in the tunnel, and sometimes they come up to the surface. They usually come straight up from the nest chamber. They don't leave through the tunnel, because the tunnel entrance over time gets filled in from the rain and from the wind, and the entrance gets closed. So they come straight up, and then they bask in the grasses or whatever little cover they have around there. And once they shed their skin, they fan out and start to learn about where their den might be, and they follow the scent trails of the adults, females that left the area.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
It appears that those scent trails do stay around for quite a while.
Yeah.
And then those hatchlings become imprinted to that nesting area.
Okay. So when they're coming out through the surface, do they work kind of in concert to kind of dig out, like maybe like a sea turtle nest, or trying to picture that?
The first one makes the hole. He'll dig the little hole, because they have that little snout, and they're very strong. They're powerful little snakes. They're about 12 to 13 inches long when they hatch.
Yeah.
And they burrow up, and then the others will follow the work of the first one. Sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 holes around a nesting area, but usually it's only 1 or 2. And then they'll bask, they'll shed, and then they leave.
Okay. Yeah. That's neat. Have you ever come upon hatching pine snakes?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I guess that's how you know all the answers.
When we first were doing our studies, we wanted to know what the incubation temperature was in a natural nest. So we put temperature recording devices down next to the egg clutch, and would monitor them. And then what we did is we built corrals around the nesting area so that we'd be able to capture all the young once they hatched.
Yeah.
And that's when we learned that other species of snakes parasitize the work of the pine snake, and they'll lay their eggs in the pine snake burrow as well. So we've documented eastern hognose, corn snake, black racer, and even eastern king snake all parasitize the work of the pine snake and lay their eggs in there as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Is this the substrate, the sand, is it pretty moist, or is it dry?
No,
there's some.
Even in a dry, sunny area, when you dig down a few inches, you start to see a little bit of moisture. You get down several inches, then it's It's very moist sand.
Okay, gotcha. That's very very neat stuff you've discovered through your
And then
stuff.
when it rains, the rain percolates very easily through the sand.
Mm-hmm.
It gets down into the aquifer.
Okay. Yeah.
So you've mentioned it a couple times. One, it's kind of a big picture question that I've had from herping, and I know Justin has had the same question. Is sort of the such a wide range in appearance in terms of rate of encounter between Pituophis sort of west of the Mississippi and east of the Mississippi, and in terms of taking in a lot of your research, it seems like a function of that might be the ratio of open areas, right? So basking in the west is so much easier than it is in the east that it's almost access to basking area as a limiting factor for populations of, I guess, potentially all snakes in the Pine Barrens or that type of habitat.
Well, even in the forest floor, there's always little patches of openings, where sunlight is hitting the forest floor. So basking is not a problem. It's having enough heat to hatch the eggs out. Otherwise, once they're done laying eggs, they're in the forest. All the snakes in the Pine Barrens live in the forest.
Okay.
It could be dense. It could be very thick. It could be edges of wetlands. Certain species of small mammals are more common in wetland corridors than they are in upland dry areas. For instance, the white-footed mouse is common in the upland dry areas, but all the different meadow voles live in the wetland because they prefer wetter habitats where they forage. So the snakes learn that, and they spend a lot of time. They go where the food is.
Yeah. Very interesting.
If you're a mammologist, you'll come across snakes when you're doing your mammal work.
I imagine they time their hatching to when the food is abundant, prey is abundant.
There is a correlation between the amount of prey, and that's what we found when we were radio tracking, that a lot of the snakes, even pine snakes, go into wetlands to forage.
Okay.
And they're also pretty good climbers. They'll go up in trees looking for bird nests. And we were tracking one female down in Mount Misery. Caulfield wrote a chapter called Memories of Mount Misery.
Yeah.
And we were tracking a pine snake there. And I was following the signal, and with radio tracking, the closer you get, the louder the signal is. It's a directional antenna. So you have to keep lowering the volume to figure out where the snake is. And I was walking around this big pine tree, and the signal was loud, but I couldn't find the snake. And then finally I took a rest, and I put my antenna up, and then the signal got real loud. I realized the snake was up in the tree.
Wow.
So I had to keep looking and looking. And the pine snake was 50 feet up in the top of the pine tree.
Oh, wow.
At a robin's nest. And I could hear the two adult, the male and female robin was scolding the snake.
Yeah.
And it was going on all the time, but it just didn't click while I was listening to the beeping of the receiver,
Yeah.
So finally I looked up and I saw that the snake was up there eating the baby robins out of the nest. And we've seen that several other times where pine snakes are finding bird nests up in the trees. Now, if they're crawling on the ground, how do they know that nest is up there?
Right.
Yeah. And some birds go through the trouble of carrying their droppings away from a nest, but I guess some species don't. But there must be some kind of scent trail around there. Or did the snake just, it learned that birds nest up in trees. So if I go up in a tree and I climb around on the limbs, I might find a nest. But we've seen that several times where the snakes are foraging up in trees.
Really?
In fact, we found a couple of pine snakes by listening to the birds.
Yeah.
The birds will be scolding them, and you go and you keep investigating, and sure enough, you come across the pine snake or a timber rattlesnake or a corn snake.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And when they're up, did you ever find them in trees that didn't have nests, or did it seem like they kind of?
Yeah, in the fall at one of our long-term study areas, we found them up there just basking, getting as much heat as they could. But the other reason they climb trees is to avoid predators.
Yeah.
When I'm radio tracking certain animals, individual pine snakes, they would, because there was very low amount of vegetation on the forest floor where you could see them easily. Yeah. They climb the trees to get away from the approaching human.
Yeah.
Oh, notice that.
That's really interesting. Coming off of you mentioning the Mount Misery piece, have you, is it fair to say that spots that Caulfield's books popularized, there are still animals there, or was that popularity, did that turn out to have a sort of negative impact?
Well, it had a negative impact on the Crosley area because people read the book and they would go to Crosley. It's everybody knows where Crosley is, and those snake populations have crashed drastically. Even though the state has now preserved over, I think it's 3,500 acres of Crosley has been preserved by both the state and the township Natural Lands Trust. There's many people still go there and steal the snakes. Years ago, I used to have a lot of cover boards out along there, and I had built artificial dens. But I stopped putting cover boards out because people would flip them and leave them to overturn and not putting them back and just stealing the snakes,
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's shameful behavior, and it seems so counterintuitive that they would risk the health and of the snake just to find one. If they care about the snakes, why aren't they caring about where the snakes live and those kind of things? It just makes no sense.
I mentioned that we built artificial dens. That was a mitigation project. I guess it was 40 years ago. The utility company wanted to put a sewer line, a 3-mile long sewer line. And as mitigation, I suggested building artificial dens. So they built 25 of them along a 3-mile section.
Yeah.
And they work quite well. But people learned about them, and some people would break the entrance pipes and try to dig them up. And some of the material we originally used, they were called Orangeburg pipe. It was before PVC pipe was available. And Orangeburg is sort of a softer material. And over time, they will collapse in, which I didn't know at the time when I put them in there. But some of the entrance pipes would get blocked. But there's at least 5 of those original dens where the entrance pipes didn't get blocked. And 40 years later, they're still being used by snakes.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. Well, so you mentioned artificial cover. There's not, which I take as good news for the most part in our experiences around the Pine Barrens. There's not actually that much sort of trash or debris. You can find, there are a couple of spots, right, that you'll run into it a lot. But compared to other places that we herp, there is actually not a ton of truly artificial cover. At the same time, in each instance that I've found some, there's been nothing underneath it. And that could just be a reflection of, sort of the difficulty of the Pine Barrens. Or do you find that artificial cover works well in that habitat? Or is it?
Yeah, artificial cover works if you set up the artificial cover correctly and you put it in an area that looks suitable, where there's some kind of structure where a snake might use. Artificial cover has worked fairly successful for us because we will select an area where there's a a fallen log or a stump hole, or it's a nice edge area where a snake might come out to bask. And sometimes if you look for shed skins, if you find shed skins in the forest, snakes usually have established what I call shedding stations, where they would return to shed their skins. So that's the place to put cover.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Beyond the obvious, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that an example of how cover works, I was working on a pipeline up in North Jersey doing monitoring. We had to remove any reptiles or amphibians that were in the way of construction work. So I found this big, thick rubber mat. It looked like a piece of an old conveyor belt. And the day before, I had seen this beautiful copperhead basking in this rocky area. So I took and it shot down a hole, and I wasn't able to catch it. So I took that piece of rubber and I laid it on that spot. And the following day, in late afternoon, I came back and lifted it, and there was the copperhead. I was able to catch it. So sometimes it'll work that quick if you know that there's a snake in the area.
Yeah.
And we subsequently radio tracked that copperhead to find out where its den was, and we did discover it was a new den in northern New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
The copperhead was just made a threatened species by the state of New Jersey. So was the scarlet snake. The northern scarlet snake was officially made a threatened species.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I guess, sad, but also good that they're protecting them and their habitat, you know.
If funding becomes available, we'll be able to do some pretty good research. In fact, the state of New Jersey just hired a PhD from Rutgers University to do a major study on the northern copperhead in New Jersey under a research grant.
Yeah. Oh, those copperheads, they're a beautiful species. That'd be sad to see those disappear. Yeah.
We only have two venomous snakes in New Jersey, the timber rattlesnake and the northern copperhead, or the eastern copperhead, as they call it now.
Yeah, I finally got to see a copperhead in the wild in Delaware, a couple years back now. But yeah, what a beautiful snake. It was amazing, too, because we saw it, you know, we knew that it had crawled and knew kind of where it was. And then you see kind of part of the body, but it's just so amazing. They're crypsis, you know, when they're in
that leaf litter. Yeah.
You can barely make out where they are. And then, oh, there's its head right there. It's fun, fun species for sure.
Well, we have 23 species of snakes in New Jersey. And the rarest is probably the queen snake. It's the only species that I personally have never caught in New Jersey. Gotten lots of them in Pennsylvania and down south, but never got a New Jersey queen snake. But all the other species that occur in New Jersey, I've gotten over my career.
Nice. Yeah.
That's amazing. Beyond the obvious sort of seasonality implied by the wintertime, right? In terms of herping the Pine Barrens, are there times of year that are better to find animals, or that you're more likely to find snakes, particularly pine snakes or corn snakes, versus others?
Well, I always said that late May and June are the peak times to find snakes, because they're mating in May and early June, and their females are nesting in late June and even into the early July. After July, August, July and August are not good times to look for snakes in the Pine Barrens. They're in the forest, all the vegetation is high, and they're just very hard to see. I mean, you can get lucky, you can find one crossing a road or undercover, but the spring is the best time. And then in the fall and in mid-September, early October, you'll find a lot of the hatchlings. All the little dum-dums are crawling around, so you'll find them.
Right, that has been a theme of our herping generally, is you tend to find smaller animals, juveniles or to newborn animals at a much greater rate of incidence, right? That's certainly something I think we've seen between maybe, their lack of familiarity or perception of a threat, and they might not have as established of a range.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's true. They're just on the learning curve of how to survive in this new environment where they crawled out of the egg. Where they hatch from, that's the center of their universe. So that the learning curve starts as soon as they leave the egg.
Right.
They've taken in a lot of information with their Jacobson's organ, just finding out how to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when a lot of predation occurs. Some different studies have found that up to 60% of a hatchling group will be predated in the first year of life.
Yeah. Yep. I guess, they're part of the food web. So that's, one of those hard things to appreciate. But yeah, it's amazing how much mortality there is for those young snakes.
But with some of our head starting with corn snakes, we have been successful with, we did two different studies. One, we did some head starting by keeping them over the first winter and feeding them and get them to grow a little bit.
Yeah.
Others, what we call cold release. After they hatched, we pit tagged them and just released them.
Yeah.
But we've gotten back up to about 25% of all the animals that we either head started or cold released. So some of those are surviving and reproducing in 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
In the wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. When do they stop being dum-dums and start, being a little more savvy to, avoiding predators?
If they get through the first 1 or 2 winters, then they learn how to survive pretty good.
Yeah.
But even big adults sometimes just get taken.
Yeah.
Especially, like I said, the difference between a male and a female pine snake.
Right.
Females 16 years, males 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of wrong place, wrong time type thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Huh.
Interesting. Have you done much work with the Pine Barrens tree frogs? Talk about an amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When I was at the zoo, I was charged with setting up an amphibian exhibit. So I would go down to the Pine Barrens in May. May is the best time to hear them calling. You get a humid evening or drizzly rainy night, and the large choruses of Pine Barrens tree frogs. So they're doing okay, because other than when they're calling, when they're not calling, you can't hardly ever find one. It's so secretive.
Yeah.
And their coloration just blends in with the leaves and the grasses and the sphagnum moss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
A handful more things here. So our lived experience in the Pine Barrens, as short as it's been, is that it has the greatest density I've encountered of ticks and chiggers that you have to try and engage with or mitigate as you're out in the field. Is that sort of unique to our experience, or we're doing it wrong or the wrong time of year or particular years, or is that always sort of the case?
It's always part of the being out in the field in the Pine Barrens. You have ticks, jiggers, and then you have what they call the deer flies, and the green eyes, called greenhead flies. There's a lot of biting insects and arachnids in the Pine Barrens. Yeah. I can show you my scars. I've had Lyme disease a few times. Especially when you're radio tracking, you're going through the thickest vegetation.
Right.
And by the time you get back to the car, you have ticks running all over you. And sometimes they fall off in the car, and you go in the next day, and then you get reinfested with them.
Yeah, we have experienced some of that. Not probably not to the extent you have, but yeah. It's
we have
miserable.
both the deer tick, and that's the one that carries the Lyme disease, and in North Jersey you have the wood tick, or the dog tick they call them.
Yeah. So. We're kind of spoiled in the West. We don't have those issues out here except for rare occasions.
Yeah, I know. I've been out there recently in the last 4 years. I made 2 trips a month at a time.
Okay.
And the nice thing was there was no mosquitoes, no flies, no ticks.
Uh-huh.
So it was kind of a pleasure.
Yeah.
And lots of
Where did
snakes
you
on
go?
the road.
Yeah. Where'd you go?
I stayed at Bob Ashley's place, the
Oh, yeah.
Chiricahua Desert Museum,
Yeah.
and
Great place. Yeah.
they showed me some of the really beautiful areas out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you make it up to find some price eye and Willard eye?
I was up looking for price eye several times, but just didn't have any luck.
Oh, okay.
The state has closed off some of those talus areas.
Yeah.
So we were looking on the edges of those or looking for other habitats. But I was with Chuck Smith, who knows how to find them.
Yeah.
In fact, on the way down, a car was stopped in front of us, and one got run over on the road.
Oh, no.
So that was the only price I got to see in the wild was a deer.
That's the worst kind. Yeah.
But I did get to see willards and a lot of other neat, black, Arizona black and Mojaves. And
such a diversity of crotalus out there. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I was really thrilled to get a couple of the green rat snakes.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Lots of gopher snakes too.
Yeah. They're beautiful, those Sonoran gophers. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's kind of the strange thing for me is, growing up in Utah, the gopher snakes are everywhere. The Great Basin gophers, and they're one of the more commonly found snakes, those and the garter snakes. And so to hear about all these rare pine snakes and difficult to find, Pituophis is kind of a different plane.
Yeah, just trying to figure it out, right? I was saying, what are the key distinguishing factors? And is it openness? Is it basking? Is it elevation? Is it above ground hiding spots as opposed to being all sort of a subterranean lifestyle?
Right.
Well, I've always wondered, especially with the Florida pine snake, the black pine snake, the Louisiana pine snake. Nobody has ever told me where they nest. Even people that were radio tracking them didn't actually identify a clutch of eggs in the wild. And my theory is they probably do the same thing. Yeah. In fact, Jeff Bean from the North Carolina State Museum has been radio tracking pine snakes, and he found that they do make their own nesting burrows in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess with the Florida pine snake, what they probably do, and same with the Louisiana pine snake, is they just burrow down into a pocket gopher burrow, because the pocket gopher already made the tunnel system under the ground, and they probably just merely dig a side chamber, lay their eggs there. But nobody's published anything that has answered that question. Yeah. But that's my theory anyway.
Yeah, that's the key, I guess, is to fund some of those projects so we can get some answers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you had the good fortune to see any of those three eastern pine snakes in terms of the Florida, the black pine?
I've captured several of the Florida pine snakes because I lived in Florida for 8 years. And I was able to, go out and catch Florida pines and find several DORs, but got to see them in the wild. The other thing I saw right in my backyard where I lived, I had a colony of gopher tortoises in my yard. And one morning I went out and I was watching the tortoises, and out of one of the burrows, I saw this head sticking up. And I looked and walked over closer, and it was an indigo snake.
Oh,
that's amazing.
Very cool.
Beautiful indigo snake in my own backyard.
Oh, nice. That's fantastic. Yeah, I have a soft spot for tortoises. Yeah, we've got a pretty good population down in the southwest corner of Utah that I've found numerous burrows and a lot of different tortoises out there. It's really fun.
Such a neat animal.
Yeah, for sure. Little tunnelers for sure. Yeah.
Another kind of general question we always try and ask guests and engage with is, when you're looking in the field, particularly in a new area, do you tend to kind of walk slowly and just sort of you're kind of carefully scanning for habitat? Do you go quickly? Do you tend to stick to trail systems? Or are you bashing through the bush? What, for people not familiar with the area, not radio tracking things, what's sort of your suggested methodology?
Well, what I usually do is I'll look for habitat structure. You try to think like a snake. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have studied a lot of these species for many years, so I kind of have an idea what a snake would like or where it wants to be.
Yeah.
So you do both. You walk along the edges of trails or sand roads. You look for hollow trees or dead trees with loose bark. You look in stump holes where the snake might be basking near a stump hole, or go back to the most typical thing collectors like to do is flipping tin or plywood or old garage doors, whatever you can flip. I remember my first trip to South Carolina, my buddy Jim Pekowski and I saw this falling down building with all tin out in the field. And there was this one 16-foot piece of tin, and we got on either end of it and lifted it. And on Jimmy's end, there was a canebrake rattlesnake. On my end, there was a corn snake. And in the middle, there was a king snake, all on the same piece of tin.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
You turn the right thing over and you're going to find something. On another time, there was a barn door that had fallen down, and it was one piece laying on top of the other piece. So we picked up the first piece, and there was a big yellow rat snake under it. We caught the snake, and we picked up the second piece, and there was a second yellow rat snake. And one was a male, one was a female.
Wow. That's cool. I once picked up or flipped a piece of tin and I heard rattling. But it wasn't underneath it, and it was a piece of tin that had folded over, and this little rock rattlesnake clobber was in the middle of the tin sheet where it is folded over. So
it was sandwiched in there, huh?
Yeah. And if he wouldn't have rattled, I wouldn't have known he was there. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. So when you're in a new area, you kind of just have to use your instincts, but look in all different kind of habitat types. I mean, the time of the day and the season also helps, and whether it's a humid day, weather always influences reptile behavior. Do
they tend to avoid the rain, or do they come out more frequently?
Some species love the rain.
Yeah,
they'll go out crawling, especially things like copperheads and cottonmouths.
Yeah,
because a lot of frogs and salamanders are active during the rain, so they can go out and catch them easily.
Gotcha. Yeah.
How does cloud cover fit into that? Is it, generally speaking, particularly in the context of pine snakes, are sort of clear days, you're more likely to see one on a clear day or on sort of a warm but cloudy where the sun's maybe trying to poke through? Well,
they'll be active on either a cloudy or a sunny day, but the nice thing about overcast, cloudy days is there's no shadows. You can see the forest floor much better without the shadows, because the contrasting light makes it harder to focus in on something. So if your search image, you're looking for a certain pattern or a coil of a snake, it's much easier to do on an overcast, humid day. So those are always, in my experience, those are the best collecting days. It has to be warm and humid and overcast. But if you're just turning things, flipping rocks or cover, any kind of weather will do.
Yeah, it's a great expert tip.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hadn't thought of it in the context of seeing the bottom of the forest floor. That's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, that leads into another question that we kind of like to engage with often is, do you have a preference for obviously finding the snake is the important thing, but do you have a preference for seeing kind of as you're hiking and finding them out on the crawl? Does that bring you a different level of joy than flipping something?
Yes, it's always nice to actually see one from a distance.
Yeah.
It just and what I do if I'm lucky enough to see something like that, I'll stay there and kind of watch to see what it's doing instead of running up and grabbing it. Watch it for a while. But the danger of doing that is if there's a hole there, it could shoot down the hole and you don't actually get to have it in your hand.
Right.
But that's when your phone comes in handy. Take pictures, before you try to catch it. I always like to get in situ pictures where the snake has coiled so perfectly. It's very hard to duplicate that when you're trying to pose a snake.
Right.
Some snakes don't want to sit still; they just want to get away.
Yeah. Yeah. Always, I've learned that lesson the hard way a lot of times. Take picture first, then go for the grab or closer investigation. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see them doing things, natural behavior.
Right. Yeah, that's the best way to learn what they're doing out there, and if you just run up and grab them, you don't get that, because then they just go into defensive or flight mode, and you don't get much natural behavior other than run away or defend. So, yeah. Very cool.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. This has been fantastic. There's a ton here, and I really appreciate your time, and a ton of great insight, both in terms of, I guess one thing I will highlight on your behalf, right, is your website for Herpetological Associates. Your publications, most of them, right, are available as PDF on the website, and just so much great information there.
Yep. And if you guys come to the Pine Barrens, give me a call. Come in June, and I'll show you some pine snakes digging.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
we actually are, and I'm glad that all this talk of June is great news relative to the plans we've already made. So, it's truly great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was nice to meet you guys, Justin and Bob.
Yeah. And, great meeting you.
Hopefully, I'll see you again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great.
Thanks so much, Justin. Bob, if you want to hang out for 1 second, Justin, do you want to do our kind of closing commentary, the quick closing commentary?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know that there's too much more to say other than, we're really grateful that Bob came on and talked with us tonight, and we're really excited about the content, and thanks again. And we're grateful for the support on our podcast with Eric and Owen and the Morelia Python radio team. And thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next week. Fight Club.